Welcome to the Startup Grind.
In a while. So can you all see my screen, by the way? It says Startup Grind from Idea to Impact.
Yes.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
Thanks for your patience. This is actually the real test. I do that on purpose just to see who really wants to be here. So I figure if you can stick it out for like 12 minutes while the presenter is trying to figure out his computer, then you really want to learn about what we're gonna do today. So cool. So I hit up to a couple of you guys in the chat when Laura and Rich were speaking, and so in the chat box, real quick, I'll type in the word chat. As Rich was saying, if you got any questions along the way, please let me know. In the email that he sent out, you all should have a copy of this workbook that we're going to work from, and we call it Idea to Impact because what we're going to do is kind of talk you through the journey that most startups go through when you're going from, hey, I've got this idea, to the place where you probably really want to go, which is making an impact with your startup. So just for a quick kind of sense for in the room. So in your with your startup right now, if you could just let me know if you're one of three, are you number one, or are you number two, or number three? So number one, if you're at zero revenue, you're just trying to get your first customer, maybe you're pre-product or your product building right now, you don't yet have customers. Second would be somewhere in like the 10 to 30, 50K kind of range in terms of your monthly recurring revenue or monthly revenue. So just kind of, getting some early customers. And then if you're a three, if you're kind of like moving forward into more robust sales, maybe 30, 40, 50 plus. So, zero, you're at one. Don't have a frown. There's no frowns here. Nothing to be ashamed of. So one, if you're not selling. Two, if you got maybe a couple of customers. Three, if you're kind of a little bit further along. So Rich is a 3, Peter's a 2, Omar's a 0. I'm not sure what 0 was, but I'm assuming that means 0 customers. We got Nicole's at a 1, we got a 1, and we got a 2 from Caroline. So cool. So we got a little bit of everyone. So that's great. 2 says Karina. Awesome. So it's great that you're out there doing a little bit of selling. So when you think about sales, and whether you're just starting that sales process and you're trying to get out and get those first customers, or maybe you've gotten the free customers and you're starting to get more contact, belly to belly contact, or Zoom to Zoom contact with your customers. When you think about sales, like what is the thing that is most difficult about selling for you? What have you found to be most difficult about sales? In the chat box, let me know. What do you like? What's the one thing that's getting in the way or slowing you down, or the most difficult? So Nicole's saying getting the first meeting. Yeah, absolutely, getting the first meeting. Rich is finding leads. Owner is saying product market fit. What else? People don't like to be sold to. Of course not. People love to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. Getting me with the C-level decision maker. So not just the first meeting, but getting the decision maker. Getting the first meeting, says Peter. Jeffy says customers who inquire, but then don't respond to calls or meetings or calls and emails. Yeah, so for sure. So a lot of toe dipping out there, but then when it comes time to spend some more specific time with you, sometimes they disappear. Proving the credibility, says Nicole. Okay, cool. Well, you came to the right place. I think what we're going to do is be able to help you out with getting a sense for what you need to do to kind of break through some of those barriers. As Rich had mentioned, I'm the Chief Sales Geek at Sales Qualia. Everything we do here with our company is working with B2B enterprise tech startups. And most of the clients that we work with are kind of coming out of that startup phase, moving into ramp up and scale up. And our job is to help them identify gaps in their sales process and help them build to more repeatability and scalability. And the way I like to think about this, if you look in your workbook, you'll see a kind of a three circles and a graph. Is I want to start with this idea to impact model and spend about 10 or 15 minutes here, and then get to help you get a sense for kind of what the most important parts of your sales process and where your focus needs to be now versus what is the later stuff. So we have one of our mantras is focus on now, and worry about later. So if you've got a pen or a Sharpie or a pencil, whatever you like to draw with, if you print this out, that'd be great. Just kind of draw along. And so the 3 circles at the top kind of represent the 3 key phases of a startup's journey. So the first phase is the phase we're all familiar with, which is the startup phase. The second phase is what we call the ramp up phase. And the third phase is what we call the scale up phase. So we go from startup to ramp up and to scale up. And the way that this model works is where you really want to go, like you start at your company, you start with like, hey, I got an idea, or somebody ought to, or maybe you've got industry expertise and you've been dealing with a specific problem in your industry yourself, and you realize like, hey, nobody's really built a great solution for this problem. Maybe we're hacking it together with SharePoint, or there's lots of manual process, or yeah, Oracle has some kind of solution, or IBM's got this thing out there, but it doesn't really work for the core problem that we're trying to solve each and every day. So you're like, hey, I got this idea. Like, I ought to start this company, or I ought to build this product. But my sense is that where you really want to go with your company is not just building a product and getting some customers. Where you really want to go is way out here, where you're making an impact. You're making an impact in your market. You're making an impact in making your customers' lives better. Your company itself is making an impact for the team that you're going to build and employ. Over time, you're impacting those people and those families, and obviously, you're making an impact on your own life. With growth comes the enjoyment of financial stability and financial wealth as well, right? And so that journey usually looks something like this, where it starts off kind of slow and then picks up steam as you come out of startup through ramp up and into scale up. And so what I want to do is kind of dissect each of these three phases for you and talk about the key challenges that you've got to overcome in each of these phases to move from early stage startup to a place where your growth stage scale up. And by the way, if anybody happens to be unmuted, if you could just mute yourself up, just so that there's some less background noise, that'd be awesome. So in the startup phase, so when we're talking about the startup phase, you're starting with this idea, and this is typically where you might build that what people call an MVP, a minimal viable product, and you're going out to market for the first time. And in that startup phase, particularly when you're selling a B2B product, there's really kind of one main goal that you're trying to get to in that startup phase. And if it's in the enterprise B2B space, it's usually finding what I call 10 paying customers. 10 paying customers. Now, why do I use that specific phrase as the outcome or the goal in the startup phase? If you've built this MVP, you're going out to market, you're trying to get those first customers. Why do I say it's important as like an outcome in the startup phase to get 10 paying customers? Hit me up in the chat box. Let me know. Why do you think I use that word or use that phrase? What's important about 10 paying customers? Demonstrates product market fit. I think it moves you towards product market fit, but you're on the right track. Validation, says Nicole. Yeah, validation in that, like, hey, I built this product and people are willing to give me some money, right? There's the word value in there as the way that the exchange of money is how we prove an exchange of value, right? Laura's saying a user who doesn't pay doesn't prove you have a solution people will pay for. That's right. So you could have some free users of your software, but unless they pay, they won't necessarily pay attention, right? So in that startup phase, what I've found is that there's kind of like three key, obstacles that you need to overcome. I think it was Michael mentioned product market fit. We actually think about it first as problem product fit. Those first 10 paying customers, what you're doing is you're proving problem product fit, that, hey, I have an idea to solve a problem. I built this product. It solves that problem, even partially, and it so much solves that problem that people are actually willing to pay me money, right? So that's where you start getting your first customers, and those need to be paying, and that's where you start generating your first set of revenue, right? So in that startup phase, a lot of times I know people start to think about product market fit. How do I get product market fit? Or how do I, sell to a lot of different industries? Or how do I do, a big outbound marketing campaign? Well, the most important thing you can do when you first launch that product is get out there and try to sell it. Because if you can just accomplish those three things, which is accomplish problem, product fit, get your first customers, get your first revenue, then you successfully kind of like check the box and you're starting to graduate out of startup mode and into ramp up mode. And the second question I want to ask you around 10 paying customers, why do I say 10? Why do we use the number 10? Is there any magic to the number 10? Bob beat me to it. Bob says 10 company shows that it's repeatable. Yeah, it shows that there's more than one company that suffers from this problem, right? And many of you might be, maybe you've been in consulting before and you've seen a company that has a problem and you go in as a consultant and you solve that problem. They pay you money for that. Well, you could bring a product you built to a company and solve that problem using that technology that you've built. But if it's still very human oriented and there's not a lot of other companies that have that problem, what you've really done is done technology enabled consulting. It's still consulting. So by widening out the number of companies that you're selling to and solving that problem for to roughly 10, then that proves that there's the start of a market. It shows that, in Bob's word, it's repeatable, right? And so it's more than one, it's less than 100, but it starts to get you to a place where you're starting to see maybe some trend in the types of verticals that you can best serve, or the industries, or the types of buyers that you know you're going to be needing to communicate with over the course of the sales process, right? So you go, and sometimes some markets, some products it's fewer than 10, sometimes it's more than 10, but it's just the idea of it's more than one, less than 100, right? Nice round number. So then you come out of the startup phase and then you move into what we call the ramp up phase. And in this first phase, the startup phase, what we're really trying to prove is viability, right? Viability of the company, getting off the ground, proving there's value. In the ramp up phase, what we're starting to get to is a sense of repeatability. And specifically when it comes to the sales process, what we need to start thinking through is thinking through systems. Because back here, all the work you're doing is a lot of hustle and grit and hard work. It's like at the kitchen table, it's leveraging networks, doing anything you can to get those meetings, doing anything you can to get the sale, maybe adding some things to your product roadmap, maybe doing some custom integrations. There's not a lot of repeatability to hustle and grit, right? And that can get you out of the garage, it can get you those first customers, but hustle and grit doesn't scale, right? And eventually we need to get to a place where we scale. Well, before you can scale, you've got to get some systems in place and repeatability. And specifically, there's 3 key areas where you've got to focus your repeatability. The first is on your prospecting, or think about that as people mention about lead gen. And so that means having a predictable way, a repeatable way of generating new leads for yourself every week or every month, so that while you're working on active sales opportunities, your pipeline is still filling, right? Or as you're doing some implementations with some customers that just bought from you, you still have a way of generating leads at the top of the funnel. There needs to be repeatability. You need to know who you're targeting, what the messaging is going to be, where you're going to find those people. Is it prospecting on LinkedIn? Is it prospecting using cold email? Is it prospecting using conferences and virtual events? Is it doing a lot of outbound marketing? Whatever that system is, it needs to be predictable and repeatable for your business. So that's the first area where you've got to get some systems. The second area where you've got to get some systems is managing your sales pipeline. So your pipeline meaning, okay, now we've got leads and we've got to bring them through that sales process. So, we talk to the lead, we find out a little bit about their situation, we qualify them, do the product demo, we answer technical objections. Maybe we have to go back to a second demo. We've got to go talk to the procurement team. We've got to go talk to the C-level person. We've got to get budget approval. We got to go talk to procurement. There's all those little steps in that sales pipeline. And again, there needs to be a sense of repeatability as you start to ramp up your sales process, because you need to know what that sales map is going to look like for every deal, so that you've got more predictability to know that, hey, if we're talking to this kind of company, we're probably going to have to get the VP involved. If we're talking to that kind of company, you might have to go up to the C-level. So just knowing what those steps are in your sales pipeline is a critical part of building out that sales process. And then the third place where we need to get some repeatability is around our customer success. So everything from once we get the deal converted from prospect to customer, how are we onboarding and training and ensuring that they're using the product completely and successfully, so that when it comes time to renewal, there's no issues, that we put ourselves in a position to do some upsells and cross-sells down the road. And so if you think through the startup phase, which is usually you're getting those first 10 paying customers, the ramp-up phase is the goal there is usually hitting that $1 million annual recurring revenue mark. So the startup phase, just get your first 10 paying customers. They're probably not paying you what you'd like them to be paying. You're probably charging all different kinds of prices for different kinds of customers. But now when you're moving into that ramp up phase and successfully moving through it, by the time you kind of finish that ramp up stage, then you should be hitting that $1 million annual recurring revenue mark. So I'm curious, for those of you that have been in the startup world for a little while, is there anything magical about the $1 million mark? Where have you heard that number before? Why is that important? Why is it important for your company? Why is it important to people in the startup world? Nicole, I'll answer your question in just a couple minutes, because it's actually related to the $1 million number. Nicole's asking about when you say startup, ramp up, and scale up, are these correlated to different rounds of funding or not? So these are actually related. Where those of you that are out there and talk to a venture capitalist or two, if you've talked to investors, is there anything now you're fundable, says owner? Yeah, now you're fundable, and specifically you're fundable from a venture standpoint. Usually think about it as a Series A. If you go out and if you're doing a SaaS product or an enterprise product and you talk to investors, if you've got a couple of early customers and you've got some proof of problem product fit, what they'll probably tell you is say, look, love the model, love the product, love what you're doing, but if you want to get a Series A, if you want to consider a Series A round of funding, then you need to hit that $1 million in annual recurring revenue benchmark. Because back here earlier in that journey is where you could get a seed round, or sometimes it's called pre-seed. When you're starting up back here, it's more like an angel round or bootstrapped. Most of you probably started bootstrapping your company, or you had some angel investments. Once you get those first 10 paying customers, you're starting to prove problem product fit. You're showing that the company has some viability. That's where you can typically raise a pre-seed or a seed round. That seed and pre-seed round is then designed to help you ramp up to get some repeatability, so you can get that race. You're on that race to the $1 million in recurring revenue, so you can close a Series A round. So your valuation is, Rich, your messages, by the way, are coming to me as a DM. I don't know if that's intentional. Might be my chat, the way it's set up. Your valuation is 5x is his question. It depends on the valuation. I mean, I've seen, historically I've seen valuations on Series A valuations. What's more important is the reason that most investors will tell you that the Series A starts at $1 million in annual recurring revenue is that they don't actually care that you are making $1 million a year in revenue. What they know from their experience is that the only way to get to a Series A is by building out repeatable systems, right? They know that you can hustle and hard work and grit and grind and do all those things we do as entrepreneurs to get those first few customers, but that's not going to be enough. The hustle doesn't scale. The hustle isn't repeatable enough where you have systems in place for prospecting and lead gen, that you've got repeatability on how you're going to convert deals and how long it takes to convert deals from the time you meet a lead to the time that they actually sign the contract, that you need to have repeatability on how you're servicing and onboarding and training and helping your customers use your product. They know that the $1 million is more like a proxy that you have built repeatable systems, and that's what allows you to grow to $1 million. It's more than just the founder doing everything they can, staying up late at night. Okay. So that's the ramp up phase. So then you come out of the ramp up phase, and again, not everybody is going to do venture funding, but even so, even without venture funding, like my company is not venture funded, but even if as a service-based business, we found that this model still holds true, right? When I first started the company, I had our first 10 customers years ago, and it was just me at the kitchen table, grinding away, doing any work that I needed to do. Then as I started to grow, I realized, okay, I need some systems in place, more repeatable lead gen, more ways of thinking through how founders are going to join our coaching program, making sure that we can deliver the results that they need to. And now I need to start building out a small team to do that. And that's the only way I'm going to get to that $1 million in revenue. And then as you start to grow out of ramp up and move into scale up, this is where you as a founder, you almost elevate yourself out of the selling, because what's happening here is you move from repeatability to scalability. And for you as a founder, really what happens is you elevate up. You start hiring sales teams. You start hiring sales leaders. So you're now managing managers, right? And so the key elements of what you need to focus on in the scale-up phase is very different from the startup phase. In that scale-up phase, the three things you really need to focus on are your metrics. So knowing what are you tracking? What are your KPIs on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis that tell you that the company is on track? And this is why the systems that you build in the ramp-up phase are so important. You need to know how many leads you should be generating for different types of activity. You need to know how much pipeline do you need to build in order to convert an X number amount of revenue every single quarter. You need to know what's the average time to close for a deal. You need to be thinking through average contract values and retention rates. Those are all metrics that tell you how the company is operating. If you don't have the systems, then you don't have a way of measuring if you're on track or off track as a company, right? And so once you have the metric in place, then you can think about the team structure that you're going to need, the people that are going to run those systems, your salespeople on the front end doing sales and lead gen, your sales, what's sometimes called sales development reps, account executives that are people that are going to be converting in those deals in your pipeline, your customer success people that are going to be doing support, your when is the right time to hire a VP of sales so you can have somebody manage the sales team. Those are all happen once you start moving into that scale phase, because now you're moving up into your own organization. You're not the one back here that's grinding it out at the kitchen table trying to find the next customer. You're managing the team and make sure that the team is hitting the metrics that you set for them. And that leads us to the last key piece, which is management. Knowing how to manage sales teams, knowing when to hire the next person, when to let somebody go when they're not performing, thinking about compensation programs, knowing when to promote someone, knowing when to move one person from one role to the next role. That's all a key part of that scale phase, so that as you're growing your team, you can make sure you have the right people in the right seats so you can continue to grow in a fast pace. So this is kind of that macro journey. And I like to share this with startup founders in particular, because I think a lot of times what happens is, we're told, like I said at the start of this model, it's like, look, you've got a few customers, now you got to figure out how to scale. Well, scale is actually a later thing. If you're just now in this startup phase and like you're at 0 customers, or you've got your first 1 or 2 customers, you're back here, your main focus for the next 6 to 12 months should just be like, how do I find 3 or 4 or 5 more customers? How do I make sure that those customers, maybe I start charging a slightly higher price for each new customers as the product releases get a little bit better? How do I make sure that those first couple of customers I have are still happy and that I'm matching that problem product fit? That should be your main focus. I wouldn't worry too much about how quickly we can grow or how much revenue, how do we optimize on price with those first 10 customers. You're really just trying to prove that you can solve the problem. Then once you graduate out of that, then you can move into systems, and then you can move into scale. And if you're in this phase, if you're, some of the people mentioned that you've got a couple of customers, you've got some repeatable revenue, some of you mentioned you're a 2 or a 3, then your focus really should be here, getting systems in place so that the sales function of your company can run on its own. Just like your engineering team should be able to run on its own. You're not going in and doing the coding yourself. You're not the one doing the debugging. You've got systems in place for QA testing. You've got systems in place for checking in code. You've got systems in place for product roadmap and product feature ranking and when to prioritize those things. It's the same thing in the sales part of your company. The sales part of your company needs to be a series of systems, just like every other part of your company. And once you've done that, then you can start thinking about the scale phase, which is metrics and team and management. So let me just kind of pause there for some questions that so you might have. So Jeff's asking, can you go into more depth about the systems and processes in the ramp-up phase? Yes, Jeff, I can. In fact, that's the next part. That's the next chapter of our story here in just a moment, so hang tight. Are there any other questions? Based on what you've seen here with this model idea to impact, when you think about your company and where you are, what's most valuable for you? As you've seen me draw out this model over the last 15 minutes or so, what's most valuable for you as you think about your company and where you are? Hit me up in the chat box. Let me know. What's most valuable for you? Nothing? Or everyone's typing? Bob's asking, in the startup phase, what are good indicators that the sales process will be repeatable in the ramp-up phase? So that's a great question. Maybe the best thing I can do is maybe sketch this out. So when you think about those first 10 paying customers, I've had this experience with 3 different startups. So I've been the first head of sales at 3 different B2B startups. One was in the ed tech space where we sold to universities. The other was in the real estate space where we sold to real estate brokers and Wall Street traders using real estate data. And the third company was a lending platform. And what I found is this held true for all 3 of those startups. So what happens in that problem product fit phase, when you're in that startup phase, what will end up happening is you think about this, there's a wide variation here. And what you might find is like customer 1 is up here, customer 2 is here, customer 3 is here, and maybe your first 4 customers, there's kind of like a wide variety of customers. Maybe you've got like one really big company, one really small company, maybe one company that's a hospital and another company that's a restaurant. You're like, God, I have 4 customers and they're paying me money and they all have the same kind of problem that we solve with our product. But geez, like selling to Fortune 500s and small businesses, selling to healthcare and selling to restaurants, like that doesn't seem to make sense. So what ends up happening is that through those first early customers, you start to identify like, now that we've implemented with them and they started using our product for 3 months or 6 months, and we're starting to see the results, what we'll start to realize is like, actually our best customers, the best usage, the best results, the best value, the easiest to service, the people who appreciate what we do the most are like customers 2 and 3. So for my next few customers, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, I should try to find more like that. So I'm going from really wide to more narrow. And then you'll kind of go through that same exercise where you're like, so it really seems like, we narrowed down, but even further, it seems like customers 5 and 7 are our best. So then we go focus on getting even more narrow with customers 9 and 10 and so forth. So what's interesting is that we always think about, a lot of times we're told, like, what's your total addressable market? How can you go out there and scale the business? Well, the best way to scale a business is to figure out how to get as narrow as possible in those first 10 customers so you can really nail that niche. Because frankly, like there should be enough market out there in a small niche for you to grow to easily to a 1 million, if not 3 or 10 or even $30 million company in a really small niche. Then after you nail that niche over the course of a couple of years and grow into 3 or 10 million, then you can always go back out wider again. And so to answer your question, Bob, I think like the best indicators of a sales process is that you're starting to get a sense for who are your best customers. You're starting to see like every time that we've had an easier sale, we've always had the VP of marketing involved. Or whenever we got sponsorship from a CTO that was excited about our product and they were able to introduce us down into the organization, the sales process went a little better. So what we should do is find CTOs that are more like that person at the company we're selling to, and that can open up the door to help us narrow down and get those next few customers and really focus in on delivering for them. So that would be one thing I would look at for sure. So my other question was, what's most valuable? Caroline is saying optimization of processes. Karina is saying impact. Never lose sight of the purpose of the value. Absolutely. Laura's saying often forget the ramp up phase, and like you say, going directly to scale. In my mind, I like having the stages broken into 3. Yeah, it's a sense of patience, and it does take some patience because it's exciting. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than when you have built a product and you have somebody that wants to buy it, and then they buy it, and then they give you money, and then they use the product. You're like, holy crap, this is awesome. And then you go find a second and a third, and you're like, oh, this is why I started the company. Even if you had to pivot a couple of times, and even though it was really hard, and you kind of like forget about the hustle and the hard work because you're getting that reward of knowing that you're helping the people that you set out to help. And it's easy to say, well, like I got 3 customers, let's go scale this thing. And what happens if you go to try to scale after 3 customers is everything's going to break, because servicing 3 customers is a lot different than servicing 30. And it's certainly a lot different than servicing 300. Finding 3 people to buy your stuff is a lot different than trying to find 30 people and generating enough leads so that you can have enough people in your pipeline to convert 30. So you can't just jump to scale. You have to think in a more systematic way. And that's why this ramp up piece is so critical. And this is where most startups fail. Most startups, they get, because they're willing to hustle and hard work and grind, they'll get to this phase and they try to jump. And by jumping, they actually end up jumping off the cliff and there's nothing there on the other side. And they end up dying out, right? Now, some companies get here, but they don't figure out how to scale. And what happens is they end up leveling out in this case. So that's where you end up with a lot of founder-led selling for a really long time. You've got some repeatability, you've got some systems, but gosh, I just can't find salespeople to sell my stuff. I seem to be the only person that knows how to sell it. I can get leads and I can find people to support, and our marketing's pretty good and our product's pretty good, but God, I can't really find somebody else to sell my thing. Well, that means that you have a scale problem. That means you haven't done a good job of establishing the right metrics or done the right recruiting to hire the right team. So, cool. Cheryl's saying pre-launch stage, the hustle is real. I keep telling myself, don't skip steps. Yeah. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Cool. So let's take a couple more minutes and let's talk about systems. So I'm going to jump down in the workbook just out of the sake of time. And you should see a 3-circle Venn diagram. I like shapes if you haven't noticed. And Jeff was asking about systems. And specifically, and we're talking about systems in this phase here. Like if you're coming out of startup phase and you want to be able to scale in 12 or 18 or 24 months down the road, if you're at, $100,000 in revenue, let's say here, you're at, 100,000 in annual revenue, or maybe you're up as high as $300,000 in annual revenue. We said what you want to do is you got to go through this ramp up phase and go from 100K or 200, 300K up to $1 million. And the way to do that effectively is by building systems. And those systems need to be around your prospecting and your pipeline and your paying customers and your customer success. So what I want to talk to you now about are getting dialed into what are those core systems that you need to build in order to effectively ramp up and build some repeatability in your sales process. So we start in the middle, and in the middle is ultimately what we want to do is get to a place of scale, right? That's the outcome we want to get to by building these systems. And I always ask myself, well, if I want to scale, like, what does that really mean? Well, if I'm in a position where I can scale my company, that means I've got clarity, I've got control, and I've got confidence. Let me explain that. So by clarity, what that means, if I'm ready to scale, that means I'm clear on my market, I'm clear on my target segment, I'm clear on my messaging, I'm clear on how to go find new leads and who I should be targeting within the companies that I want to sell to. And so I've got clarity of focus, I've got clarity of market, clarity of message, clarity on the problem that I solve. And the marketplace also has clarity. That's where you start thinking about product market fit. Because if you're now going to those target customers and they're saying, yeah, I do have that problem. And yeah, you're right. The existing solutions that are out there do suck. And I am interested in learning more about what you do because I would like to see if your solution could help us. There's like this two-way mirror of clarity that happens. That means that you're in a position, that's one of the factors to know that you're ready to scale, right? The second piece is control. And the reason control is so important, that's knowing what the process is. Like if you don't have a process for selling, then you're always going to be at the mercy of your buyer's process for buying. I'm going to say that again. If you don't have a process for selling, you're going to be at the mercy of the buyer's process for buying. And that's a quote from David Sandler, who did some sales training years and years ago in the 70s and 80s. And what that just means is like when you have control, that means you know how your sales systems work. You know how you generate leads. You know all the steps you need to take to go from lead to qualified to demo to answering technical questions. You know how long that should take. It's almost like you've got a system in place for going from lead to converted customer. And it makes you feel like, hey, I've got control of whether or not we're going to be able to move these deals through the pipeline, right? And then the third piece is confidence. And that just says like, hey, we're out there solving problems for customers. Our customers love us. They're renewing, they're upselling, they're buying new stuff from us. They don't mind the price increases. It gives us confidence to know that the product we build and the systems that we're implementing are actually working. And our customers have the confidence to know that they can trust us. Those are indicators that you're qualitatively in a place where you're scaling. So when it comes to sales and systems, that's where we've got to get dialed in around these three areas. The first is your prospecting. And specifically, I think of it as building out a prospecting plan of action. How are we going to go out and find new customers to fill the top, new future customers to fill the top of the funnel? The second thing we need is what we call a pipeline pull-through strategy. So now we have the leads, we've qualified them. What are all the steps that we're going to take to pull those deals through our sales pipeline? Pipeline pull-through strategy. And then the last piece that we need is our customer success. This is all about conversions and retentions, or conversion and retention. So these are kind of your core pillars of your sales process where you have to get repeatability. And if you have repeatability, then you set yourself up for scalability. Now, the thing is, if you don't have a prospecting plan of action, right, then you're going to have no leads, right? No prospecting means no leads. If you don't have a pipeline pull-through strategy, then you're not going to have any revenue. And if you don't have any customers and you don't have a way of keeping those customers, well, you have no future, right? You're just going to be a churn bucket, right? And that's not a place where that's sustainable over the long run. And so around these three core pillars, there are what I call 9 sales accelerators. These are basically the 9 core systems that, I'll make the whiteboard available to you if you need to, or you can just jot down notes. The 9 systems around these that you need to dial into. I'm going to tell you what those are. So around your prospecting, the first one is what we call funnel fillers. So this is basically, what are the 2 or 3 ways that your company, not any company, or how you read on the internet or on LinkedIn and how other companies are generating leads, how is your company going to generate leads every week or every month? So you're filling the top of the funnel. And that's when I say, how does your company do it? Because it's different for every company. We have some companies we work with that are very active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a great lead generation source. We have other customers where their market is not on LinkedIn. One of our clients is selling a hardware device to outpatient surgery centers. And these surgery center operators, they're just not hanging out on LinkedIn. So that means they've got to fill the funnel by doing a lot of research, getting big lists, and doing, frankly, some cold calling and some cold emailing in order to get appointments with the people running these surgery centers. It's different for different companies, but you've got to have a way of filling the funnel. And I usually recommend 2 or 3 strategies of filling the funnel so that you have some diversification. Like we've seen places, and I'm sure a lot of you see all this yourself, a year ago when things went to shutdown, if a company was dependent on conferences for leads, I'm going to set up a booth and beat badges or have meetings all day for 3 days to generate a pipeline for myself. Well, we can't do that anymore. If that dries up, you need to have 1 or 2 other ways of filling the funnel. So funnel fillers is just one of those accelerators. And if you have this in place, it's going to accelerate your sales process because you always have new leads coming in to the top of the funnel. The second part of your prospecting is what we call your authority voice. So this is simply, how are you teaching your market about their problem? How are you showing them that you are a leader in that space? How do you show your voice of authority? And it could be through webinars, it could be through a podcast or white papers or a book that you've written. It's a way for you to show your marketplace that they should be listening to you. That, there's the old way of doing things and there's this new way. And I know a lot about this new way. So if you want to come follow me into this new way of doing things, it's going to be a hell of a lot better than the old way. And so having established authority voice through different channels is a way to help your market almost opt in to listen to you, right? And authority voice strategy, again, is different for different companies. For some markets, a book is really effective. For other markets, it's doing a podcast. For others, it's doing their own live events as a way of generating authority voice in a marketplace. And then the third piece, this is what we call lead qualification. So now you've generated the leads, you've brought them in the funnel, you've taught them about their problem, they're willing to follow you. Well, the key thing for us from a selling standpoint is to know that not every lead is equal. Not every lead is qualified. Just because somebody's interested in learning about the product doesn't mean that they're qualified to buy it. Doesn't mean that there's urgency or a budget or they're the right person. So we need to have a lead qualification strategy as a way to filter out the bad leads so we can focus and spend our time on the people that are the good leads. And those are the people we put into our sales pipeline. Okay, so those are your first 3 accelerators. It seems weird that a lead qualification strategy would be an accelerator because you're feeding people out of your funnel, but what it allows you to do is spend more time with the right leads and also make sure that the people that you're targeting are in fact the right people that can buy your product. So then we jump down to the pipeline, and there's 3 systems there. So the first one is your demo, what we call demo design. So if you think logically, what happens? You get a lead, you qualify them, and now they're like, hey, can I see the thing? Can I see the product? Let me check out the new technology. Well, there's a process for how you demo your product, and it's not show and tell and click and show 75 pages of the demo. There's a very specific process on how your demo should be focused on their problem, not your product, right? And if you don't do the demo the right way, this is a lot of times where deals can die. The demo is not a stage in the sale. Demo should be a catalyst to the rest of the deeper conversations that you want to have. Okay. Then once you've done the demo effectively, then it's about what we call prospect partnering. Some of you might be familiar with this idea of a mutual action plan. So think logically what happens. You have a lead, you qualified them, you showed the product, they're really excited. Well, now it's our job to take them to that next step. And a mutual action plan basically says, look, you've told us about your problem. We showed you how the product is going to solve that problem. But now we got to get everybody else's approval. We have to go through procurement. We have to get the technical people to buy in. We might have to do a proof of concept to make sure that our integrations work properly. So let's build a mutual action plan over the next 3 months to solve all of these problems or answer all those questions. So now the sale goes away from all product-based, and it almost feels like project management at this point, because you're trying to overcome those hurdles. And it should feel like partnership. It should feel like collaboration with your prospect. That's why we call it prospect partnering. And this is an accelerator because now they're helping you move that deal through your pipeline instead of you chasing after them. And then the final piece here is what we call momentum maintainers. Momentum maintainers. How do you keep the deals moving when they have a tendency to stall out? What do you do when budgets change? What do you do when your stakeholders change? What do you do when there's a technical buyer that has a big objection about an integration or tells you that his team doesn't have time to do the integration that you need them to do? You've got to have a playbook on how you're going to keep this deal moving forward. This is all part of your pipeline pull-through strategy. And those are your next 3 accelerators. And then the final 3 systems here, the final 3 accelerators, this is your conversion, right? So now you've marched them through your sales pipeline. We have to show them why they're going to buy. Think of this as return on investment. One of the key systems you have to have in your sales process is at the end of that sales process, when they say, send me a proposal, you go, great, would love to send you a proposal. Let's make sure that we're both really clear on the return on investment that you're going to get when you buy our product. Because if they're not clear on that return on investment, then that number, whatever the number is on that document that you send to the CFO is going to see red. If they see $100,000, but they're not clear on what they get back for that $100,000 investment, then it's a cost. It's red. But if instead, as part of that proposal process, you say, great, let's do a cost benefit analysis. Let's do a why buy analysis. Let's do an ROI assessment before we put together this proposal and send it over to the CFO. That way, when they see the $100,000 number, they go, oh, but with this $100,000 investment, I'm going to solve a $10 million problem over the next 3 years. Now I'm buying because it's only $100,000, right? It's a number that's in green, not red. So that's why we consider this an accelerator, because if you have this in place, it's going to accelerate your sales. The next piece here, when it comes to conversions and reducing and helping implementations, is what we call risk reducers. And think about this as, your prospects want to believe. I don't know if you guys remember the X-Files. I used to be a huge X-Files fan in high school. And Agent, was it Mulder, had a big poster on his wall, a UFO on it, and said, I want to believe, right? Your prospects are like that. They want to believe that your product is going to solve their problem, but you're just a startup. And there's social risk and career risk and financial risk that's associated with implementing your solution. So it's our job as a seller to be able to show them how we can help them reduce risk. So that might mean having staged rollouts. Maybe it's starting with, listen, before we do a full rollout, let's do a proof of concept. Then we'll go to a pilot phase. And then from a pilot phase, we'll go to a phase 1 implementation. And every step along the way is going to help us prove mutual success so that you can feel comfortable moving to the next step. So by laying this out for them and having this pathway, it helps them feel like they can take steps without having to jump off the cliff and hope that the product's going to work for them. And then the last piece here is your customer success strategy. And specifically, I call this a sales accelerator because I think too often companies wait until after the contract is signed to talk about implementation or talk about customer success. I think you have a huge advantage as a startup to be able to go to your customers and say, listen, before we get to the signed contract, I want to do this ROI assessment. I want to make sure that we're tiering you through our process so that you can be 100% sure that we're going to be able to come through for you. And I also want to map out for you how we're going to support you, what our customer success strategy is going to look like. This is everything that's going to happen the first week that you sign this contract. This is how we're going to onboard you. This is how we're going to train you. This is what's going to happen at the end of the next month. we're going to come back and do a second round of training. And at the end of the first quarter, we're going to do a quarterly business review to make sure we're on track to get the results that we're promising to you. You can actually use that as part of the sale, and that will increase the confidence that your buyers have. And then that will give you more confidence to charge the price that you want to charge. So these are your 9 core systems, your 9 core sales accelerators that you can get those working in that ramp up phase here. Kind of build one of those systems out every month or two. Then this is a 12-month process for most companies in an accelerated way. In some cases, it could take as long as 24 months. But by going slow and getting these systems in place, you're going to get a lot more repeatability, a lot more predictability, and then set yourself up for a really strong ability to scale later on, because now you know how your systems work, you know how to measure them, you know what team you should be hiring, and you know how to manage to those expectations. So those are the 2 big models I wanted to make sure we share. I know that we started a little late with the tech issues. I'm willing to hang out a little longer if you guys need to. Maybe open up to Q&A. Laura, Rich, or anybody else that might want to talk through your specific situation. I also wanted to mention that there are some folks that if you want to get more help with this, one of the things that we do is we've got what we call a foundations package. So foundations package consists of 3 things. So number 1, it's a 1 hour it's usually 60 to 90 minutes. It's a 1 hour strategy session with me, where what we'll do is a full evaluation of your entire sales process and help you build a specific sales strategy and a plan of action for you over the next 6 to 12 months. The second thing that we provide to you is a 1-day pass to a masterclass I'm teaching in May. So it's a full day. We're going to be working on these sales accelerators with a small group of other startup CEOs. It's a full day masterclass from about 9 to 4 in the afternoon. And the third thing we provide as part of this foundations package is 3 months of access to our client library. 3 months of access to our client library, which has all of the tools, the frameworks, the playbooks that we teach to our clients and help them to implement their sales process every day. So if you want to take advantage of that foundations package, we don't offer the client library usually at all unless somebody's a client. The masterclass, a ticket to the masterclass by itself is $500 usually, and the strategy sessions are usually also $500. But what we did is we packaged this all together in a foundations package, and we're offering it together. So you get the 1 hour strategy session plus the masterclass plus the 3 months of access to the client library for one price of $500. So if you think you want to take advantage of that, I just put a link into Calendly where you can book in that strategy call, and there's a link to Stripe, and you can reserve a spot. There's a couple spots open for next week and the week after. So if you think you want to get some more help on this and get my eyes on your process and help you build out a plan and join us in that masterclass, it's a great opportunity to do that. But in the meantime, I want to make sure to open it up to questions for anybody else that has some outstanding stuff. Laura, Rich?
I don't see any questions, but folks, please go ahead and type them in there in the chat, and we can get Scott to answer them. He's given us some extra time here, so please ask your questions because he has a lot that he can share with you.
Yeah, and I just see Peter's comment in here as well. So Peter's question: most CEOs, or maybe it's like most CEOs, I have no idea how to really sell, qualify, assess a deal for the likelihood of closing. How do we actually develop actual selling skills in a CEO before she hires her first rep? Well, I mean, the first is obviously you'd say the easy answer is like, well, go do sales. But that's like saying, well, how do I go do sales if I don't know how to do sales? What I would recommend is, I'll put another link in here, and this is a link to this book. I think we might have sent out a link to this book earlier as well. This is a hard copy book. You can buy it on Amazon, but that link is salesquality.com/book. You can download a full free PDF version of this book. So the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, it describes what I call the Q framework, the Q framework. The Q stands for questions. The Q stands for questions. And those questions are designed to help a sales, like a founder or a CEO, build that first version of a sales process. So the questions are, what problem are you solving? So if you think about for every deal, how do I make sure I'm clear on what problem we're solving for the customer? Which target market are we? Does this lead fall into our target market? Who are the buyers? Do I know who are the people that need to get involved with the sale? When is the next step? Meaning, do I have control of the sale? And where am I in the sales process? Early stage, middle stage, late stage? And then finally, why will they buy? And how will I deliver? Those 7 questions kind of encapsulate some of these sales accelerators, but on a more basic level. And so for your CEO, what I would recommend is just grab a copy of this book. And then as you're reading through each chapter is a different question. So it's a way to get really clear on the kinds of questions you should be asking to identify if the person is truly qualified, how you should be thinking through the next steps in your sales process, whether or not you're dealing with the right decision makers or stakeholders, or you're dealing with somebody that I call a buyer vampire, somebody that's just going to like suck the life out of you. So I would use this book as like an initial playbook or a framework that could be used to build version 1 of a sales process to kind of learn those basics. That'd be the best place I would go, Peter.
Yeah, and Scott has posted the link to get
Yep.
the book in the chat.
Yep.
So there is another question from Carolyn.
Yep.
Can you share some of the most common mistakes founders make when learning the sales process?
Wow, the most common 27 mistakes that people make now. So I think one mistake that people make, and it doesn't feel like this is a mistake this group would make because you're here learning about sales, but one mistake I certainly see is hiring a salesperson and thinking like, well, gosh, sales is really hard. I'm just going to hire somebody to do it for me. And at the earliest stage, and even in that ramp up stage, you're still going to be heavily involved with doing the sales. Certainly the first 10 customers mostly need to come from you and your network and you figuring out who the market is and what the message is and who you can help. And even in that ramp up stage, even if you have a little bit of sales help with generating leads or helping with customer support, you're probably still going to be pretty heavily involved with every deal. So one mistake I see people make is like they try to outsource sales by hiring a salesperson, which is really expensive and almost never works. The second mistake though that I see is that founders, they go too wide too soon. So if you remember the diagram I showed a little bit earlier, where those first few customers, then you might see a lot of variety in terms of size and price and implementations. And the sense is like, wow, I can solve a lot of problems for a lot of different kinds of companies. I can solve for Fortune 500s and I can solve it for small businesses. And the feeling is like, well, I want to be able to scale and I want to make a big impact. And it probably comes from a good-hearted place because you're like, wow, I started this company, I built this product, and I want to make an impact, and all these different companies need my help. So I got to like go out and sell to everyone. But what ends up happening is that you don't have the systems, you don't have the ability. And frankly, the version of the problem for a Fortune 500 is very different than the same problem that a small business might have. And so another mistake I see is that founders go too wide too soon. And the more narrow you can get, painfully narrow on a niche until you get through those first couple of $1 million in revenue, the better off you're going to be. Because now you're going to be really dialed in, solving a specific problem. You're going to have a really strong reputation. Your product's going to be built to solve that problem. And there's not going to be anybody else that's going to be able to touch you from a competitive standpoint. So the second mistake is I see founders go too wide too soon. And then the third mistake that I see is they don't sell enough, or they don't sell frequently enough. Like they think about sales as like part of their job. And they're like, okay, well, I guess I'll do like a sales day on Friday and I'll just like send out 10 messages and try to get some leads. Sales is an everyday thing. It's got to be a core function of what you're doing each and every day. And so one of the things that we teach our clients is it's sort of a joke, but it's not really. There's a little joke in every joke and the rest is truth. But the question is, did you do your 20? And like, what do you mean by your 20? Did you do 20 outreaches? Did you contact 20 leads? Or did you do 20 follow-up emails to people you've talked to in the past? Did you do your 20? Like if you wake up every day and think about, in sales speak, sometimes it's called the power hour. When you're doing cold calling, it's like the power hour. I'm going to do cold calling for an hour. It doesn't have to be cold calling, but it could be, hey, I'm going to do my 20. I'm going to go into LinkedIn, go through my network of people who I think might be able to help me either directly as potential customers or introduce me to people that could be potential customers. Did I send 20 personal messages out to those people asking for their help or introductions? Or if I went to a virtual event and there's other people in my industry that were also there, Like, did I go through the list of attendees and did I send 20 follow-up messages, even to the people I didn't get a chance to meet, and say, hey, I saw you were at this conference. I read a little bit about your profile. This is the problem we solve. If you think I might be able to help you out, I'd love to have a conversation. Did you do your 20? If you just do that every day, then I guarantee you're going to have enough leads to fill your funnel to get those first 10 customers. And that's going to launch you into that next phase to ramp up. So mistakes are hiring too soon, going too wide, and not doing sales every day. Caroline, the name of the book is Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. If you just click on salesquality.com/book, it'll bring you right to a landing page where you can just pop in your email address and we'll email it to you.
And Dominic has posted a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
Asking for some tips on hiring the first salesperson.
Tips on hiring the first salesperson. So that's a pretty broad question, but what I can tell you is start small and narrow. So what I mean by that, if you go back to our model of the Sales Accelerators here, I think I still have it. Am I still showing my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So there's a prettier version of that picture here a little bit later on in the workbook. And so when you think about sales, sales involves a lot of activity. Sales is everything from lead generation all the way through to customer success, because even now some customer success people have some kind of retention target or revenue target, which is all feeding back up to revenue. And in between that, there's 20 or 30 different things that all considered sales. So when I think about tips for hiring salespeople, what I usually tell people is the best place that you can start is on the edges. So if you think about your time as a company founder, where you're probably spending the most amount of time for the least amount of return is either filling the funnel. So when I talk about do your 20, yeah, you have to do your 20, but at some point the 20 is going to turn into you have to do 100 a day. And those 100 that you're doing messages a day might only lead to 3 or 4 meetings. So your time, you might spend a whole day sending 100 messages for 3 or 4 meetings. That's important, but your time becomes way more valuable than what those 3 or 4 meetings might be worth, the exhaust that you get. So what you want to think about is once you get to some level of repeatability around how you fill the funnel, whether that's outbound emails or using LinkedIn or running webinars, as quickly as possible, as soon as you start to see some repeatability, document that system and find somebody to run that for you. And it doesn't have to be even a full-time person. It could be 2 part-time people. Say, this is our target list. These are the email addresses that we've gotten. These are the emails that I've used that I know work. Use these emails, send them out, follow up with a phone call, send them a LinkedIn message. That's our 1, 2, 3 touches in order to book a meeting. Go do that. And if you can get somebody to do that for you, that's going to free you up to focus on those meetings that get booked and make sure you do a good job in the demo and make sure you have time to answer the technical questions. And the same thing on the customer success side, right? Once you get good at implementing those first few customers, you're going to get a lot of repeatability around training and answering support questions. So you can find somebody to take that over for you. So start on the edges first, because the most valuable parts of the sales process around things like qualifying the leads and making sure that deals keep marching through and having those ROI conversations, those come later on in terms of where you can hire. So start at the edges, work your way in. And then eventually, as you work your way in, you're going to hire an account executive. So then you'll have sales development people doing leads, account executive helping you convert deals, customer success people in the back end supporting. And now you've effectively kind of squeezed yourself out of the sales process because you have somebody running all 3 parts of that selling system. So that's the way I would be thinking about it.
Bob has a question. What are some novel ways you can add value to prospects in the funnel filler phase besides ebooks or webinars?
I think ebooks and webinars are great, but one of the things that I've always found to be really useful is using other people's content. I think a lot of us get absorbed with marketing content, I have to write a blog post, I have to write an article and an ebook, and I have to start a podcast, and it gets overwhelming, right? Because you're like, what am I supposed to do? The company thing, right? That's a full-time job, just doing that. And I think what's important to remember is you don't necessarily have to use only your own content. I think it's useful to have one kind of core piece of content, whether it's a webinar that you run every month, or it's an ebook that you've published, or a white paper that is kind of your content that helps you position what you do in the marketplace. But as you're reaching out to people in the marketplace, there's probably other content from other people in the industry that if you share that, it's not necessarily about like whose content it is. It's that you're the one that brought the idea to them. So I used to do this all the time when I was selling real estate data, when I was at Altos Research. So a big part of our revenue came from what we call the Wall Street market. So we sold data to Morgan Stanley and TCW and all these other big financial firms that were using the real estate data to trade mortgage securities. And while we had our own blog and we would do a webinar once a quarter, one of the main things I would do from the sales standpoint is I would just go to other articles, periodicals. I would even find academic journal articles related to housing market data and would find those resources and say, hey, Tony, listen, I remember 2 weeks ago, you were talking about this model you were trying to build for the housing market. Well, listen, I just found this, this academic article from Bob Schiller over at Yale, and it just got published. I'm sure you probably haven't seen it. And it seems like it might be useful for you as you and your analyst team are thinking about how to model the housing market. So I thought I'd share it with you. So it's a way for me to just use other people's content. And so it's high leverage and it's almost just as valuable as having your own. So that's one of the things that's always worked really well for me. It's just using other people's content.
All right. And Michael has a pretty specific question.
Okay.
What, if anything, would be different for selling enterprise software to banks? Like long sales cycle, lots of people who can say no, few willing to say yes. So I think what would be different is how would the sales strategy be different?
Yeah. So let's take out the word banks. Would anything be different if I was selling enterprise software to hospitals? Would anything be different if I was selling enterprise software to telecommunications companies? Like every enterprise sale, like every industry, if you're selling to the enterprise, you're going to have long sales cycles. You're going to have lots of people can say no. Few people are going to be willing to say yes. So it really is not anything different. I think what's different, and this is the importance of being narrow and focused on the problem you solve and who you serve, knowing who your ideal customer profile is whoever you're selling to, whether it's banks or healthcare providers and hospitals or telecom companies, they want to know that your product is going to work for them. They probably may not doubt that it works, but they need to know it's going to work for them. And this is the importance of staying narrow and staying focused. Because if they feel like, well, you've got this great solution, it seems to work pretty well for hospitals, but gosh, we're a bank over here, I don't think it's going to work for us. And so the only thing that would be different for whatever narrow segment or industry or vertical that you're targeting, you just want to make sure, like, the more you narrow, then you can speak to them in the words that they are using to describe their problem. Like I sold to banks. I've sold to banks both at Altos Research, at CoreLogic, and also at Blend, which is the lending software company I was most recently the head of sales at. And when you're sitting across the table from a chief compliance officer at a bank, they want to know, like, that I know about all of the bank regulations that have come through since 2008 and the housing crash. They want to know that I know that, what the different compliance rules and regulations are. I can't just kind of sit there and be like, oh yeah, well, I'm sure our software can handle it because we handle compliance in healthcare for healthcare companies all the time. A compliance officer is like, no, dude, like you don't get it. Like in our industry, it's very, very specific. So the only difference is making sure that the more narrow you are, the more you're going to be able to be an expert around that problem and be able to talk intelligently to each of those stakeholders involved, which can help you shrink the selling cycle, which can help fewer people want to say no and help more people be willing to say yes. And even within banks, there's a big difference between Golden One Credit Union and selling to Wells Fargo. Yeah, they both originate loans, but Wells Fargo is originating, 1,000 loans a day. Golden One's probably doing, 1,000 in a quarter. So their version, I was selling a lending software solution that would help mortgage origination process go better for consumers. What Wells Fargo needed is totally different than what Golden One needed. So we needed to focus not just on every bank lender, but we focused at Blend just on the top 100 lenders for the first couple of years because we knew the version of the problem that Wells had and Chase and Bank of America and First Republic and Prime Lending and all the other big ones was very, very different. So we needed to be able to specialize there.
So we have one more question from an attendee, and then I have a final question I will
Sure.
ask you after that. So Karina just generally wants to know how to overcome opposition. I think every salesperson wants the answer to that question.
And opposition in what context? Like during the sales process?
That's what I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I was just having a call with one of our coaches today, a woman named Megan Mishiak, and we've done some training with our clients, both around what we call customer discovery, which is generally earlier in the sales process, like in that lead qualification stage, where you want to get really clear on the problem that your customer has. And so she's done some training there in past months. And then today we were preparing a training on negotiation, which everybody's like, at the end of the sale, how do I negotiate to get the best deal, get the best price and best terms and all that stuff. And the thing that we realized as we were talking through this training is that the best time to negotiate is making sure that you have alignment early in the sales process. So when you think about like, when is there opposition or when does negotiation feel adversarial? It's when one side wants one thing and another side wants another, and you're like butting heads, and it's like, all right, fine, I'll give you this, but you got to give me that. And it's just like this race down to like somebody needs to feel like they win. But if there's true alignment and there's vested interest on solving a core problem, and both sides are almost like, look, we have our interests and you have your interests, but we both want to win. Like, we really want to solve this problem, and we know that you want to provide this solution to us. So let's figure out how we can align our interests. And so the best way I've found to reduce opposition is to go way back early in the sale, as early as possible. That first question I mentioned as part of the Q framework is, what problem are we solving? Always start there with every prospect, every customer that you're talking to. Because if you just skip to the demo, like you have request a demo on your website and people click and they request a demo, and you show the demo and they're like, this is great, send me a proposal. And you send the proposal and you spend like 6 weeks chasing after them just to get a response back. Well, you actually never learned why they wanted the demo in the first place. And that's where you might feel opposition later on, because now you sent the proposal and like, well, my boss says it's okay, but it's too expensive. Or John over in IT doesn't want to do it. There's all this opposition. Well, a lot of times there's opposition because there's no alignment in the beginning. And the best ways to get alignment is early in the process when you're doing discovery about what's the problem you're trying to solve. How long has this been a problem? What happens if you don't solve it? What other options have you tried so far to solve this problem? Like, let's get really clear what the end objective and outcome looks like. If we're really clear about that, then we're going to have alignment through the rest of the process. And then at the end, there really is not a lot of negotiation. So that's where I would say, if you're feeling opposition, it usually means there wasn't alignment early in the sales process. It's still like, why are we here? Why this? Why now? Why us? Let's get clear on that. And that should reduce the opposition you're feeling later.
Great answer. All right, so my question for you, Scott, and you may have touched on it a little bit in the beginning of the presentation, but over the last 10 years, you and I have done a few workshops together, maybe more than a few. And I was always impressed with something that you would share about why is it important that the founder of the company learns, in the beginning. Why is that so important? Beyond just bringing in revenue, how does that contribute to the success of the company?
Well, the reason it's important is because, first of all, whatever hypothesis you have around the problem and the product that you built, it's probably wrong, and it's not your fault. It's just like, it's a hypothesis, and no product is going to survive first contact with the marketplace. So you're going to be making a lot of adjustments. Some adjustments might be large adjustments, we call them pivots. Some adjustments might be micro adjustments. And so you've got to be able to figure out that first, carve that first path into the woods yourself. You got to blaze that trail. You can't rely on somebody else to do it. The second reason it's really important is that there's so much nuance when you're trying to sell a new product. When you're a startup, you're effectively, in most cases, selling a product that your buyers have never bought before. Like, if I'm selling a copy machine, if I'm selling office furniture, if I'm selling real estate, office real estate, like, companies know how to buy those things. What they usually don't know how to buy is our products, because our products are replacing manual process or consultants or SharePoint or Excel or some 1998 software that was been used here for the last 30 years and nobody bothered to replace it. And so as the nuance of trying to figure out like what is the buying process here? Who needs to get involved? There's just so much that learning that has to happen to get 0 to 1 and 1 to 10 that you can't outsource that any differently than if I said, hey, Laura, you know what? I got this great idea for a product I want to build. It's a brand new whatever. I don't know how to code. So I'm just going to like write down some notes and then ship it off to somebody in Ukraine and then have them build it for me. Now they'll probably be able to build a product, but the chances of that product matching my expectations and what the market probably needs is really, really small because I wasn't involved. And so I'm just not going to get the same result, or it's going to require lots of tinkering and lots of back and forth. It's going to take forever and it's going to be really, really expensive. So the best thing I can do is come up with an MVP. Even if I don't know how to code, I could wireframe something. I could work closely with a designer and come up with, some kind of mock-up, show that to customers. I can at least get a feel for what the product needs to look like and what the customers need. And then, okay, now I know what the product needs to do. I know what the features are. I know how it needs to look, what the design elements are. Now I can take that and give it to the developer in Ukraine and they can go build it. But if I don't do those first things, I can't do the second thing. It's the same thing with your sales process.
Okay, great. And I think we're out of time. Carolyn
Okay.
had another question in the chat, but then she said she thought maybe you were answering it. So we're going to respect your time though.
Okay.
And Rich is going to bring it home.
Cool, man.
Anyway, Scott, I want to thank you for coming over today and then helping the folks here basically understand what it is to create a sales process. I wish I had attended your seminar when I first started my startups. I was actually watching your thing and thinking, man, I wish wish I knew now what I knew back then. With that said, that's about it. Normally we have, and if we were doing this physically, we'd have more of an icebreaker and more, introductions. Next week, next month, I have Kim Emerson. She's with Thor Ventures or something like that, Laura? Oh, you're muted, Laura. And you're still, okay, now you're ready.
House of Thor.
House of Thor. It's like a VC, right?
She's an angel investor, and
okay.
She's also a business consultant to startups.
So she's going to be speaking. It'll be the second Tuesday of the month. Topic to be determined. And we are also working on some other, Laura and I were actually discussing other topics for upcoming. So just go to startupgrind.com/Sacramento and see what we got. And Scott, again, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us. And as soon as this is we get this recording, I'll have it edited and eventually posted amongst all the other things you have to do. So thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Good to see y'all. Have a good night. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.